The agenda here is I'm going to share some material with you about building attended automations in particular, and how both from a developer standpoint and from a business standpoint, we should think about these automations. So I will go ahead and share my presentation here. And what we're seeing is this idea that not all automations get built the same way. Sometimes when we think about attended automation, we think about just keyboard presses and mouse clicks, but the reality is that we have a bunch of different design patterns or different methodologies that we can use. So we're going to explore some of that, and then we're going to ask our panelists to come in and help further give some examples of success stories and challenges that they've experienced. So the first scenario is the most classic one that we have. It's the hands-off attended automation scenario. Typically, you have a process, it can be automated, but the robot needs to take control of the mouse and keyboard. So you stop using the mouse and keyboard as the robot processes this information or executes on your behalf, right? In this scenario, you're happy typically to give up a few seconds of time with your computer if the robot can do something much faster and much more accurately than you can. But it's not the only scenario, right? As we come into the side-by-side situation, we have different opportunities for the robot to work in parallel to you on your computer. We can use features like picture-in-picture, where the robot has its own copy of your desktop in order to run while you still work on your activities. We can also use the simulate, type and click and send Windows messages, commands. All these things enable the robot to work behind the scenes so that you're not interrupted. Then we have this idea of interactive engagement, interactive automations, right? And this is where the robot and the human are working together throughout the process in order to accomplish the activity, right? So what can happen here, and I'm just seeing a quick chat here. Just to clarify, we're going to be using our questions section. My mistake at the onset. So don't look for the chat. Look for that question section within the interface there. So in our interactive scenario here, we have a couple different things that we can do. We can bring the robot, have the robot bring information to you. So an example here might be, I work in a call center. There's 3 different systems that I engage with while I'm on a call. The robot can go into those different systems and bring information to me and surface it in our apps platform. It can give me a console that I can use, and I don't even need to interact with those systems. Or it can use forms and callouts. Forms are the in-process capability we have to surface information. And then the second half of that story is, how do I disposition that information? Once I'm looking at something, I want to tell the robot to go update those systems or submit that request, right? And then we've got some of these other capabilities where we have a JavaScript SDK. We have some customers that want to embed the robot into their applications and have the robot essentially showing interface within something that already exists for them. This is another option. We can also have reminders or change a website using our Inject.js capabilities so that the robot is actually working with the human in order to augment that experience and execute something faster. I'll come back around to this in a minute, but the idea here is that it's not just the robot working on its own, but now the human and the robot are working together throughout the process, either bringing information in or dispositioning information and pushing it back into those other systems. Probably my favorite scenario is the event-driven scenario. And this is another capability here where the robot is waiting on the human to take an action. So an example here might be, you're working along and then you go to submit a report or take an action by clicking on a button in a system. The robot can see that you're taking that action and then actually intervene. It may give you the option for the robot to complete that task for you, or it might do an inline QC check and validate that information is there and before you make that submission. So this idea that the robot doesn't have to be something that the person is thinking about, that it can be ever present and taking actions on the user's behalf, is a really powerful concept. And then finally, we have interconnected. And this is the idea, especially as we get more complex and more robust in our rollouts, you might have multiple attended processes running simultaneously. You might have unattended and attended processes running in hybrid automation. So interconnected gives us the ability to leverage these multiple processes and to leverage our unattended implementations to put the processing where it can be most efficient. A great example of this is when back in that call center, you've got somebody with an SLA, let's say, to complete a submission, to make that request, but that same SLA doesn't exist in order to actually process it. Maybe there's a 24-hour turnaround on the processing. So maybe you use attended automation to make the request, and you use unattended automation in order to do that processing. So across these different patterns here, you've got capabilities that you can use. And don't look at this like an either or. An automation doesn't have to be just one. Automations, the best automations, often end up taking elements from each of these different patterns and then threading them together. And as business users, as leaders, as users, as developers, it's incumbent upon us to think about how the robot can work and what the best way, what the best capabilities, whether it's a pattern or a specific functionality, how do we bring this to life? Because at the end of the day, users have to enjoy doing this. They have to see the value, and the more that we can fit the features and functionalities to the experience, this is where we create the value, and we drive that usage, and we drive the love of automation that we're looking for. So with that, I would really like to welcome my guests today. If you would please join me. We have an amazing panel. And what's really exciting about I'm sorry, before we welcome the panel, please stay on, but we do have a quick survey for you, and if we can load that up. And it's just one question. And as we talk about scaling, as we talk about how we grow within our organization, this is a chance for us to get a bit of a sense of where the audience is at. So if you could find the poll item within the webinar, you see that we have one poll in progress. And this is really around where you might be experiencing some friction. So please take a moment, find that poll section, tell us, what you're experiencing. We'll keep it open for 30 seconds or so that we can get some good responses. And then throughout our discussion, we can talk a little bit about those responses, what we're seeing, and maybe some thoughts around how to approach that. So we're doing really great. We've got about a third of the audience that has come in and given us some feedback here. Please find that poll that poll section within that interface and take just 1 minute to tell us where you're starting to experience some friction. All right, we're well over halfway there. Let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so it looks like the company deploying robots is our biggest blocker here, and that makes sense. Certainly, it's difficult to get started there. And after that, our second biggest issue is having company resources to help get you started. So that's excellent. That makes sense. And then finally, finding those relevant use cases. So sometimes when we talk about RPA, we talk about cognitive blockers that stop us from progressing. We talk about organizational blockers, getting those robot processes there. So we'll be able to look at that. So now, please, I would like to invite the panelists to join us. And what I love about our section today is we have very different perspectives coming together to talk about some of these experiences and building automations and using automations and driving that experience that employees love. So Tracy, you're one of our MVPs. Thank you for joining us today. Please, would you take a moment and just tell us about your journey and where you are right now with RPA?
Sure. So I am a UiPath MVP and a certified developer. I have a great passion for helping others do meaningful work. I do work with Centric Consulting. I lead our operational excellence practice in Miami. I work a lot with the healthcare industry. The first robot I built helped hospice patients get the fastest bedside care faster than was humanly possible.
Thank you. I really do love that that story. Krishnan, thank you for joining us. Krishnan, you're as a partner, you both have internal and external purview into how RPA is being built. You have your own practice and you're helping other customers. Thank you. Could you take a moment and tell us a little bit about your journey and where you're at today?
Sure, Brandon. So I work with Cognizant and I head the digital business operations for them, and automation is part of the business unit I run. So we provide a lot of automation services to clients globally, and it's probably one of the most fastest businesses that we have growing. And very interestingly, the number of attended bots or unattended bots have been growing significantly, and we have leveraged all the tools that UiPath especially offers. And we also have driven a lot of automation in our operations. So we're close to around 15,000 bots running across the globe, which we monitor at any given point of time. So that's about, I'm happy to talk through some of the experiences, some good, some bad, happy to talk about.
Jairo, I'm not sure that we can hear you.
No, I think you were on mute. I don't know if it was me or you, but I didn't hear the part where you were talking about me. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but I've known you for a while and I've worked with UiPath. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. I lead the Global Shared Services Organization at Equifax, and as being part of a global organization, I'm also responsible, and me and my team, about leading RPA efforts across the globe. So started the process very early, I think 4.5 years ago, with the kind of holding hands with UiPath and all the folks that that we worked with in the past. And when we started the journey, we were already doing automation, but we didn't have the the opportunity to scale it in the way we have done it over the past few years. So today, we are deploying, and our goal is to deploy more than 500 bots and keep them running this year. Over the course of the past 4 years, I think we've deployed, just because of the nature of shared services, we've deployed this robotic solution across multiple functions and processes, from business operations to finance, to security and to technology, and many other applications and use cases. So happy to be here, happy to talk about the automation, how that is changing the world for Equifax.
That's great. Thank you so much. So Jairo, let's jump right in with you. As you've looked at your employee experience, you've you've been doing this for a while. You've seen different patterns, different attempts to engage employees. How receptive have your employees been to engaging with the digital workforce?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Brandon, I think when we started the journey 4 years ago, a lot of the efforts we did concentrated on building and scaling RPA was around unattended automation. I think the thought process there was we were able to kind of remove big chunks of work and then have bots running on the background, and then allowing that capacity to be redeployed somewhere else. But particularly when we talk about RPA, digital resistance was one of the first things that we put in our agenda as we were developing the program. We knew from scratch that we're going to get resistance from people. When you talk about automation, you talk about things that people don't like to hear. So and we have a saying here, like we're not building a Terminator here. I mean, we're building bots to help you, right? And one thing is to say it. Another thing is to really take it into your culture and then make people understand that automation is good for them. So fear of losing my job, hesitation about sharing my knowledge, those key things, we tackle at the beginning. But I think a little bit of the challenge that we had was that automation was not really visible to people, and I think we attended automation kind of brings that up and allows for our people to really see the possibilities and really kind of experience the benefits of working in tandem with the digital workforce, right? So, and one of the key things that we discussed at the time was, and we failed miserably, I have to admit, is that because of the lack of visibility, people didn't know, right? And because they didn't know what's happening, they really wasn't, engaged or, in using the automation. So if, of course, if you don't use it, if your users don't use it or they don't want to use it, then the program could be very successful, but then it will fail because it is really about the combination of human and bot. And I'll say that today things have changed. We've learned a few lessons. One of the key things that we've learned over time is that if you build your attended automation, you have to design to improve user experience versus process improvement itself, which kind of represents and has some challenges. But if you don't take into account what your users and what your employees and your people are telling you about what their pains are, then as you develop your solution or design your solution, you may fall into traps, right? So building from how can I improve your life, make your life easier, you can translate that to how can I make consumers and customers lives easier if my people can do a better job by using these tools. And since attended automation has a very visible way, for people to understand that what they do now is more powerful with the help of automation, then it becomes to get into their hearts, right? And then it's easier for you as you embrace culture. So then people is engaged, with you in your automation journey.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And it doesn't always go perfectly correct, right? No IT implementation does, right? Sometimes there are hiccups along the way, and it sounds like there's some very valuable lessons there from engaging with employees and then understanding what they're looking for, what their expectations are. And Tracy, in your work, I'm curious, when things go right, when customers take the right approach and employees are engaged, what does that look like? What are some of the tactics that are used?
So we always like to start out with a workshop. That ideally looks like a half day and bringing groups from different areas together to teach them what does automation look like. Like you said, it doesn't look like Cyberdyne systems. It's innocuous. I like to show an automation I built at home that goes and grabs my children's grades because it doesn't take anyone's job. People know what grades look like. It emails. I have 4 children. It was the worst 15 minutes of my day. 7 different classes, 4 kids. It was terrible. but they look at that, they see the grades being sent, it's a minute and a half, and they think, oh, this makes sense. This is just, key clicks and mouse strokes. And then we walk through what that is, what it means, and then we use a calculator, and each person talks about some of the difficulties they have in their processes in their group, and they make a case for some of the issues that they're having. And what we walk away with at the end of the day is a candidate process or two, usually a couple of problems solved aside from the automation, where somebody's got plans to meet with someone else, just aside from everything else, and one or two things where the group has picked together what they think are the best candidates. This calculator of additional backlog of processes and cheerleaders in all the different departments at the end of the day that understand what automation is, and they don't think that it's going to take their jobs. So it's an organizational change management effort. We think that's what that looks like. People are not scared of it, and they're gladly willing for automation to come in and solve these different process problems for them.
That makes sense. And Jairo and Tracy, you've done a great job of illustrating from the employee's perspective what this starts to look like, and how do we approach the employee kind of in service of that. Krishnan, as the leader in your internal practice, what does the other angle look like? What does success look like from a leadership standpoint, from a COE standpoint?
So one of the key things, the mantra that we said was, how can every person have a digital assistant to do their jobs better, and also to earn more money, because you also pay by the number of transactions processed. So if you are able to make more money, use a bot attendant to do your job faster and more accurately, right? You can earn more money. So you appeal to that sense. It just makes more sense, right? So that is one. So democratizing digital was a big theme, right? And we said, how can people progress from processing data on data crunching to more insights, right? To get more insights. So I think that is one journey. So the second journey was in terms of transaction-based money, and we kind of wrapped it all under democratizing digital theme. So and that's where the whole concept of attended automation and how can we kind of drive that culture. And it's all about culture, as the other panelists have said. It's simple. It's not, you don't need to be afraid of it, but it's also about how do you build that culture. And that's something which we are trying to build across a 40,000 member unit across the globe, right? And that's a journey we started, and we achieved some good initial success. Just kind of catching on in a big way.
That's great. It's really interesting, because the more that we talk about automation capabilities and the advancements that we're making, the more and more this becomes a human story. It's this interesting arc. I'd like to open it up to the whole panel. As you think about the journey that your employees are going on, that your departments are going on, and Krishnan, you really touched on it. How is this impacting culture? How is this impacting the way that people are working together in or outside of the context of automation?
So I think it's also the customer demands, right? In terms of the end service customer, can you do things faster for me? Can you do things cheaper for me? Right? And can you do it in a more effective way, right? And primarily everything that we say, like every automation that we do, attended or unattended, we look at three things. Either it should reduce my risk, increase my client experience, reduce my cost. And what we've said is every person should be able to, we've taken a 40% increase in efficiency over the next 3 years, right? So every person, if they're able to do one transaction today, can they do 1.4 in 3 years, right? And we've gradually said 1 to 1.15 this year, next year another 15%, next year another 15%, right? And we've taken all these bot examples in one area and we've showcased it. We're kind of celebrating the success. We're having people talk about it. We're having bot fests where people come and talk about talk about their case studies, reward them. We've built it in the culture that anybody who copies a bot which is developed by others will get rewarded. We've also inbuilt in a culture that, you know, if you develop a bot, I mean, if you need to get promoted, you need to develop a bot at least, right? So I think a couple of those things we've brought in, and obviously rewarding and celebrating, right, and giving a lot of and that's kind of worked. Simple things, you know, giving a bot T-shirt, giving bot cups, right? But just trying to build that, and even it's harder, right, Brandon, in a virtual environment. I mean, and having bot shirts distributed, and have you built a bot, and so on and so forth, right? So people love it.
That's great. Jairo, Tracy, how do you see culture being impacted by automation?
So what I would say is, you know, I heard you know, Tracy and Krishnan talk about same things. You know, this is about how do you influence people, and how do you evolve, you know, with people to achieve your goals. And I think robotics and RPA is just one way to achieve that, but that is an excellent way because it's very tangible. So I think, you know, when we talk about culture, change management, like Tracy was mentioning, is critical. Getting people involved early in the process. Like I said, when we started the journey, it was about, hey, let's hit the ROI, right? We need to save cost, right? Or we need to demonstrate financially that we could save cost. But you know, in reality, in order to engage people, like I give you an example, you know, we have a process that is a very important process for us, where we help mortgage, you know, lenders and financial institutions help their customers, right, as they're looking for getting a loan, which, you know, most times translates to kind of the one-time project of a lifetime, right, for many of our customers. And one of the things that we did is that we approached the team, and we found out that our analysts, they were spending a lot of time, like 20-15 minutes, just gathering data from the different systems, just getting ready to make this phone call where they were going to talk to the banker, the processor. They were going to have a conference call. So it's a very complex call, unstructured call, but the intent was to get everybody on board towards one goal, which is what was going to help, you know, a customer of our customer get what they wanted, or what they were expecting, or what they required. So but, you know, as we took that time to analyze it, then we also realized that it was not only that the call and the actual work was complex, but also after the call, they had to spend like another 15 minutes just kind of getting all the information out of the call, making all the different changes in the different systems, so that the actual work can be allocated and then fulfilling. Like, for instance, a credit file can be sent to the financial institution for them to make a decision. So that process was really, really difficult and very hard to teach and hard to execute. So when we build the solution, we build an attended solution, and they, you know, as we engage the team, they call it Trinity, because we're Trinity, like Matrix, the movie, right? So they put a name to the bot. And by naming the bot, because the intent was to get information from 3 different major systems, and then updating those systems, you know, really kind of get in their heads, right? And they put all sort of fancy articles, you know, on our internal website, and they were sharing stories about, you know, how good it was. So having that one case where you can really focus on improving the experience, and people really coming back at management and other teams saying, hey, this is great. You know, now I'm way more productive. I don't have to spend 20 minutes just building stuff. The bot gets it for me, gets it ready. And now I can jump on the phone, really help my customer. And then at the end, I just said to the bot, hey, here's what you need to do, right? And then the bot goes and executes. So that removes a lot of the complexity of the process, makes life way much easier, and it helps with culture, because you want people to follow, right? You want people to replicate the good experience and also learn from the failures, like I said in the beginning, but really applying those learnings and then, coming up with a good story to tell.
And I think on the other side of that, I've seen clients where good communication hasn't happened at the project level. And there are people sitting in chairs that learned that robots are coming through the grapevine and are scared to death. And so I've seen them compete with the robots while they're, being tested out, and are truly, completely thinking that they're going to lose their job any day and things be taken over by robots. So I think it's important to communicate proactively about it. We know that the statistics are there that attrition is better in the end, but if it's communicated properly, it can be done really well. If it's not, it can go very much not good for that entire team, and people are very fearful of what's coming. I think on the whole, at an organizational level, culture-wise, we know that there will be a shift over the next 10 years to far more technical skills being required in organizations. I think the numbers are 90% plus as far as more technical workers required to support bots. And then we definitely will need to hire more folks that have good emotional skill sets, good emotional support on the other end of that. So the call center workers won't just be typing away and doing those administrative tasks, because bots will be taking those over. So folks will need to make sure to hire for those skill sets.
That makes a lot of sense. A couple themes from the questions, and thank you everybody for contributing to that. One around use cases and examples of where we can find great automations. Mentioned in there is a link to our marketplace where we have code that you can download. We've got about 15 different processes that you can download right now. Load them up. Our aim there is to make them as generic as possible, so that people who don't have experience building robots can have something that can get them started. Maybe it's an 80% solution or 100% solution in some places. And also, I'd like to ask the panelists, maybe something really quick. If you could go back and do it all over again, what's the very first process that you would implement? Krishnan, if you could rewind the clock, where would you start?
I think there are initially when we also embarked on this idea of citizen development, one of the things we embarked was training every single person in operations on bots, right? So we said, because we wanted to democratize digital, we wanted everybody to develop bots, and we soon realized that it may not be everybody's cup of tea to do that, right? I mean, even though it has become much more simpler and so on and so forth, you still need. So what we did was we created a bunch of power users. So while we trained everybody, I think we should have created the power users a little early. So I think one of the things was creating a small power user community, identifying people in your team who have both operational and a little bit of tech inclination, and creating that small power user group who can then operate in pods and kind of build a team of transformation. Somebody from the automation team has also the operations SME, right, who has a tech bent of mind, right? And then once they do it for one particular process in pairs, again replicating in every pair that you do work for, or you do it in one area in RCM, replicate the same example, or you do one example in procure to pay, you do it everywhere. So that way the library grows, and you have more a pod-based agile way of delivery, right? So which kind of accelerates the way you can deliver and also create this repository, right? So obviously we use the automation hub, which UiPath had for creating the repository of ideas. One of the things probably would have done little differently than 6 months ago, but it's more to do with UiPath, availability of task capture and stuff like that. But I think now with availability of tools like task capture and task mining, you could get a list of ideas much earlier in the fray, right? So before going down this automation journey, I would potentially, and I would call it more like process engineering, if you will, deploy process engineering tools, which are basically two things, right? One is the task discovery at a desktop level, which you could do using things like task capture, plus also process mining, which primarily takes the application log and comes up with a bottom-up view, right? And when you combine both, you also kind of find out and encourage people to find out, hey, what are the ideas that come basis that, what are the things you can potentially automate or reduce the cycle time, etc. And also very clearly define the metrics. Brandon, one of the things was also, what is the purpose of doing automation? What are you trying to achieve? And very clearly articulating that value proposition was very important. So these are some of the things we did, and these are some of the things probably we would do differently, right? Using some of the discovery tools, the benefit of having those now. So people starting on their journey could probably also use that.
That makes sense. Jairo, if you could rewind the clock, where would you start? What would be your first process?
So that's interesting question. I don't know if I would, change a few things, but I know the way we started in deploying and how we were doing things was a little different. Like I said, we were focused on merely on unattended automation. So, we've deployed, a lot of attended now in finance processes. Things such as cash applications and reconciliations are very easy ones where financial analysts can rely on the bot, and they can keep on doing some other things. I think contact centers is a big area where we started late in the process. So to me, I would have perhaps started there, because there is still a lot of potential as we were dealing with specific problems. We were trying to focus merely on reducing kind of the work that was non-value added, right? Which I think that's a good way to start. But as we were maturing our journey, we realized that it was more about what real business issue you want to solve, right? So when we found use cases that big, with that sort of attention from executives and that sort of pressure from the business, we were able to really maximize and accelerate the effort where we deployed, and that's where attended comes into play, because we now have a way to deploy, hundreds of bots, instead of deploying just one bot for a specific process that it may or may not generate value for a smaller unit. And perhaps that was the right way to do things when we started. But in reality, what I think is, focusing on what's the business problem you're trying to solve. If you find an opportunity where you can learn how to master this and deploy it, that will really draw attention towards you. And then, of course, you can find the resources that you need in order to start your journey, make it a sustainable process, and of course, bringing up the culture. So that's what I would change if I had to change something when we start.
Makes a lot of sense. Hindsight's always 2020, right? Two quick side notes here. First, thank you for the questions. I would encourage the audience, if you have specific questions that you would like to point towards one of our panelists, or a specific topic, a scenario, please don't hesitate to put those in. I would love to get specific and dig in a little bit more to some of these responses and topics. So Tracy, as Jairo and Krishnan have talked about their initial starts into automation and what they've learned, what they might have changed, what's your experience working directly with COE leaders, and what you've heard a little bit of a shifting of mindset, right? If I had done this differently, right? It's a learning path. How, for you, over time, have you been able to influence leaders to think differently, to approach these new set of capabilities?
So I know RPA is its own different animal for sure. So going into a client that is first learning about RPA and the project team, there's definitely an education process on RPA being its own different animal. The team doesn't really know what to expect. They know the typical software development life cycle. And so you definitely have to walk through how RPA is a beast of its own, and how things are a bit different than the standard SDLC that they might come to expect. So requirements are different. They're a bit more specific. It's not a standard user story. They are step-by-step instructions. We need to know every mouse click, every keystroke, every single screen, much more granular detail because we have to mimic that with the automation. So more detail than they're typically used to. Testing is different. The user will not be performing all of those things, the automation will. So it's a lot of watching what the robot performs, a lot of reviewing perhaps what the robot did over the weekend and verifying that it did that properly and the results of that. So that's definitely a different process than what they may be used to, where the QA team's not doing all of the things in testing. So a lot more observation. The idea of production access, that is just, security teams clutch their hearts. So just explaining all of that, getting people to think differently, but at great benefit. Automation projects are typically a lot less expensive than custom software development. If we talk, say, modernization, the price tag on that 10 years ago is a lot more than bringing in a license for UiPath these days, which is a much smaller price tag, and we're not having to go replace mainframe systems and pay for very expensive mainframe developers. So it comes with great benefit, but it certainly has a whole different spin on thinking. Sure. There's definitely an education process.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And we do have a question from the audience here, and it looks like I'm not the only person that really is, amazed, intrigued with your hospice example. Could you take a minute and just walk us through what that process did, and maybe also what you observed as you walked in? I mean, these processes come from inspiration. They come from somewhere, right? So sure. Spend a couple minutes on that.
Sure. So the end of life care process is typically a hospital-based process. So when one qualifies for that type of service, there's a physician referral process and a social worker is involved, and they're typically using some type of tooling, and a referral is sent out to providers of that service, and an electronic communication is sent out that says, hey, can you guys provide this service to whichever providers are selected by that social worker. And so obviously the providers for these different services, they may choose one, they may choose many. Sometimes the first to reply back wins, and sometimes they may send it to many, and the families may talk with a number of different parties. So obviously you want to have teams that can respond to that quickly. Sometimes some of the providers may have someone for very large organizations on site already down the hallway, ready and able to help those families, because usually there's only 2 or 3 weeks as the average time that they have to be around after the point that there's a referral. So in this case, they had human teams 24 hours a day, all day long, ready and willing to accept those referrals on behalf of the provider of those services. And so the automation based on that referral coming through on this third-party website, the human team at that point all day long was checking that website 24 hours a day, 3 different teams of people around the clock. That was their job, to check this website for this information. And so we took that process from 8 to 10 minutes with the human team diligently checking that all day long to 3 to 5 seconds. And so not only did we grab that information, but we furthered it to also go create the chart, grab the information, put it in the electronic medical record system, send a text message to the provider that might be also down the hallway, where they can be walking down to that patient's bedside and say, we're here, how can we help? Let's talk about your options. Let's get them the help that they need right away.
It's such a touching story. I think a lot of people have experienced hospice and those scenarios, and I don't know if there's a better example of where that human touch and the human interaction supported by robots and on the back end, it just rings so true, so important. Thank you for sharing that. Another question that's come in is about that culture of fear being replaced by robots. And Krishnan, I love what you said. Develop a robot as a prerequisite to getting the promotion. There's this. You've gone from fear of robots to you can't continue without the robots. So maybe what does that look like in your organization, and what are some of the tactics that you've used to shift that cultural perspective?
See, we had to, so we made all the training free, right? So one was everybody gets a certificate. I mean, you go through a formal training. We created power users in every team. So there's a power user for every 50 people. So we had that community going, and then we had communities formed, right? Specifically in terms of whether it's a healthcare so the healthcare group within healthcare specific to payer and provider, and then we again created the F&A groups, which are very specific to procure to pay, record to report, order to cash. So the folks who are working in those groups got together, looked at what other people are doing for some clients, and then replicate some of those. So it's basically also you learn from each other, right? And then when the people see, hey, somebody's put there, somebody shared their story, right? And they see, why can't I implement, right? And obviously they see the recognition that the other person is getting. So it's also a good motivation, right? And they also share their success stories about how they're able to do the work faster, get more time for doing better analytics, make more impact to the client. So we make employee the center of this thing, right? And obviously when you do all of these, you save cost, you have better experience, and you have lower risk. But it's all about making employee the centerpiece, right, of this. And I think that's the beginning of the entire cultural transformation. It's a long haul, though. It's a long haul. I mean, doing it across various sites, various locations, various industry verticals. It's taken a year, and the journey, I won't say is over. It still carries on, and we need to just continue to be at it. And now it's acquired a meaning of its own, a momentum of its own. So it's almost become a way of doing things, or a culture, right? So ultimately, unless it becomes a culture where then they see people getting rewarded.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because we hear time and time again that seeing the robot work, right? That giving you the context almost immediately lets some of the pressure out of the system, right? That it's when it's an unknown quantity, that's where people start making up their own narratives.
And I'll just give you a simple example, right? I mean, we have banking, financial services, where working for various clients, simple things, right? Bank statement download, right? I mean, using things like where bot can trigger in the bank login page, enter the credentials, select the required type on all of it, and saves the statement in the folder and sends it to the required people. Simple things like that, right? But even then, I mean, that's the same thing that can be replicated everywhere, right? Or you take a specific example in the payment space, and you just keep on replicating it everywhere, right? And then it kind of picks on.
If you ask somebody who's really looking forward to entering their timesheet this pay period, you usually don't get people jumping up and down. Things like that, they would gladly give them away. Or please, my expense report. Ask about each task, they will volunteer. So those things they gladly give away one by one.
It's
yeah,
true.
so in our case, we we address that in a similar fashion, in which involves education and change management as two practices that go hand in hand as we do this. So early on in our process, we recruited people with that sort of expertise. So our COE is not only conformed by developers or support specialists, right? So we have a cross-functional practice where we have training experts, technical writers, and people that can, make this sort of complex technological framework easier for people to understand, right? So we've built training curricula. So we now have in Workday RPA awareness for anybody who wants to understand what it is, where we put videos and they can see what's doing and what's not doing. We also built out an operating framework in which we have created an automation champion network in order to promote cultural adoption, across the globe, right? So it's not only about what I do, since I sometimes most times wear my dual hat about what I do in my organization because I'm responsible. So it's not like I tell them, hey, go and do it, and they do it. No, it's about adopting it and then replicating the model in other organizations outside. That's the challenge. So with the Automation Champion Network, we have people that are embedded in the business unit, that they are passionate about this topic, that they're charged with materials, and they become that sort of ambassador to recruit others, from managers to frontline employees, about what this is and what benefits can bring to you as it creates capacity. And of course, as we implement these use cases all over the world, change management, like in the example that I gave you, like working with them with the specific operational teams, let them name the bot, let them design the user flow, especially on attended automation, help us overcome some of the issues that we had before, where we were doing the financial analysis. And because of attended automation is, kind of automates parts and pieces of the work of a person, it's harder for you to sometimes capture that and translate that into a financial metric, right? So then we have to work with the Automation Champion Network to help our different businesses understand that this is not only about financial benefit. Yes, it is, but it's not all the time. It's about improving quality, making sure our compliance is being executed, and that we improve those controls, making sure that as we're only humans, so that our agents have sort of a framework in which it helps them prevent from error making, which sometimes causes a lot of cost to the company. So the cost of quality is always going to be high, right? So we sometimes see this like, hey, here's an investment. You want to improve quality, you want to improve customer experience. So let's review our automation roadmap. Let's review your use cases and make sure that we give that emphasis, right? Because the cost of no quality sometimes is many times is greater than the cost of implementing the solutions. So it is a combination, like I said, education, right? Not only from a development and how to build the bots, but also how to use the bots and where and what type of use case you could explore as you gain attention from different business units and they want to deploy. That sort of messaging, it is very important from a COE point of view to capture the value, to share those best practices and good experiences, to continue to promote, which is critical for employees to understand what is in there, what RPA has to offer, in the day-to-day life as well.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It's funny. There's a couple of themes that have come up here. One of them is that automation champion, or that automation coach, and that was actually in a recent IDC survey that was published. That was one of the main distinguishing factors between successful and unsuccessful citizen developer programs or automation programs, is having that coach, having that person that can help other people and bring them in. And the other common theme here is business drivers around. It's not just about cost takeout. It is about the experience. It is about quality. So we're closing here on the end. So I like lightning round. I want to ask each of you one final question, and that would be, and the name of our session today is Building Solutions Employees Love. So let's flip it a little bit. Tracy, starting with you, finish this sentence. Employees love solutions that...
Save them time.
Good. Krishnan?
Help them deliver better client experience.
Jairo?
Help them achieve greater things.
I love that. I mean, there's time, the most valuable thing. There's employees, why we're ultimately here, and greater experiences, what we aspire to, what we want to achieve, how we want to grow. Thank you very much. It's the hour goes so quickly. I wish we could spend 3 hours just talking about your experiences and your insight and wisdom. Thank you very much for joining our session today and for everything that you've shared. Excellent. So with that, we'll start to wrap up. Just have one or two closing thoughts here for you, and I'm going to share the continuation of this series. And as I share my screen, what we have is another 3 sessions coming up, and within these sessions, there is a continued focus with the BTOES group on the end-to-end journey of processing. We're going to explore what that looks like in banking and financial services. We've got the session coming up next in insurance specifically and around building the workforce, the fully automated call center, and then healthcare inefficiencies past that. So we're going to progress through different parts of both organizations as well as departments within those organizations. So please join us. You can register at insights.btoes.com/webinars. So all of our content is listed there. And then as well, we'll be sending out a survey, and that survey will have some insight around this presentation and other commentary in there that we'd really appreciate your feedback on. We'd love to get your perspective. So thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again at future BTOES and UiPath webinars.